In 2020, the youth vote was a reliable pillar for the Democratic Party. They carried voters under 30 by 24 percentage points, a margin that formed the backbone of their winning coalition. For decades, the political playbook has prioritized the television screen. Campaigns spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a cycle of scripted ads and network interviews, assuming that's the only way to reach a national audience. But that model only works if the audience is actually watching. By 2024, millions of young men had moved away from cable news and network broadcasts entirely, becoming invisible to the standard media buyers and pollsters. No presidential campaign can ignore an entire demographic and expect to win. This disconnect created a gap in the media landscape that traditional television ad buys had no way to bridge. The shift in strategy began within the campaign itself, prompted by 18-year-old Barron Trump. He recognized that the campaign was operating with a massive blind spot in how they reached his peers. He explained to his father that young men aren't getting their news from the major networks. Instead, they look to podcasts and Twitch streams for both entertainment and information. The campaign shifted its focus to the Manosphere, a digital network of creators who lean into hyper-masculine, culturally conservative themes. They targeted the space's biggest players. This led to high-profile appearances on shows hosted by figures like Logan Paul and Joe Rogan, placing the candidate directly in the ears of millions of dedicated listeners. Securing these interviews was just the first step. To turn those listeners into actual voters, the campaign followed a specific logic designed to change how that audience viewed the election. A University of Bristol study decoded the psychological mechanisms these influencers used, identifying 3 elements of influence that shaped viewers' political opinions. The first is narrative construction. Instead of a story of progress, influencers presented a narrative of national decline and immediate crisis. Within this story of a failing country, Donald Trump was positioned as the only figure capable of restoring lost greatness. This made support for his campaign feel like a moral obligation. By framing the vote as a moral imperative, these creators gave young men a sense of personal stake in the outcome. They were being called to participate in the restoration of the country. The second mechanism is audience adaptation. Influencers spoke in the unfiltered, casual language of Gen Z men, bypassing the polished tone of traditional politics. Trump signaled a shift with a 13-second TikTok debut at a UFC event. He avoided policy talk entirely, choosing instead to signal his cultural alignment with the crowd in the arena. Creators then linked this cultural identity to real-world frustrations. They focused on the economic anxieties felt by young men, specifically the rising cost of living and post-pandemic inflation. They also leaned into bro topics and the kind of edgy humor that traditional politicians usually avoid, validating an anti-woke worldview through entertainment. Validating a demographic's cultural identity builds a level of trust that traditional policy speeches struggle to match. It turns a political candidate into a representative of the audience's lifestyle. The third mechanism is collective influence. The campaign utilized a wide, interconnected web of creators to surround the audience with consistent messaging. To their viewers, these podcasters and streamers aren't distant authority figures. They are trusted peers. When a 24-year-old streamer and a 29-year-old boxer endorse the same candidate, it creates an echo chamber where the message is reinforced from multiple directions. This network effect made support for the MAGA movement feel culturally mainstream and socially acceptable among a demographic that previously leaned Democratic. Over time, this collective peer validation overrides the critiques of traditional media institutions. The influencers themselves become the primary source of political truth for their audience. The data proves the strategy worked. The Democratic youth advantage dropped from 24 points in 2020 to 11 points in 2024. Trump nearly doubled his support among young black men and made record gains, winning 54% of Latino men. The final tally shows that approximately half of all men under 30 in the United States cast their ballot for Donald Trump. This realignment suggests that the Manosphere strategy successfully turned digital engagement into real-world political action. The 2024 election cycle proved that a national campaign can bypass traditional news networks and still build a winning coalition. Social media influencers are no longer just entertainers. They are now active agents capable of defining the political reality for their audiences. This cycle indicates that the center of political influence has moved away from the newsroom and toward the podcast microphone.